If you're on this video, you've probably either bought my budget template, you're interested in buying a budget template, or you're just interested in budgeting and want to see how other people manage their money. Either way, thank you for being here. So today we're going to set up Sally's budget, and I just went through and added a couple descriptors so we have something to go off of for her budget. So Sally is a single woman making $75K a year. She's paying $1,500 in rent. She just bought a new car and she has a little bit of credit card debt. So step number one is setting up the planning tab. I would highly recommend going through the instructions and then moving on to the actual planning. So we'll just move on here. So we estimated Sally is making $23.46 per paycheck, and assuming she gets paid twice a month. So that would be 24 paychecks in a year. So the first thing we would do is go to income, add salary, and we're starting in May. So we're just starting from scratch. So I'm actually just gonna hide January through April to make it a little bit easier so we can make goals for the remainder of the year. So 23.46, and I'm just gonna push this out through December. Sally doesn't have a high yield savings account, but she's going to get one. So we're gonna put high yield savings account, interest, and we're just gonna leave it blank for now. The last thing to note, I like to put these at the bottom. We have a refund section here, so I'm just gonna call that refund. And we also have reallocation categories. So reallocation of sinking funds and long-term savings. The purpose of these is so if you're reallocating money or you get a refund, you're not adding that money as income in order to budget. For example, if you have a refund in May of $50, you would add $50 for refund, and then you would go in your transactions tab for May, refund, for $50. So by doing this, you get an extra $50 to allocate in your budget, but you're not counting that as income because that would be kind of double dipping. You already spent that money, you're just getting money back that you spent. And for reallocation of sinking funds and long-term savings, these work the same way. So for example, if you have $5,000 in a travel sinking fund and you had an emergency and you want to pull money from that travel sinking fund, let's say $1,000, you would put that here. So just for this example, we're gonna add a travel category so it shows up in our transactions. You would first go in and choose reallocation of sinking funds. You wanna take $1,000 and reallocate it somewhere. So you add that, and then you have to take that money out of your travel fund in order to put it somewhere else. So you're gonna track this as a transaction, which means you pulled money out of that fund. So your travel fund will have the correct number, and you will also have an extra $1,000 to budget and move that to your emergency fund. Those are just quick examples of the refund and the reallocation. This is just so you don't have to backtrack in your budget and switch out the numbers. You can have an accurate snapshot of every single month, and then you could just use these reallocations to move money around. I'm sure everyone has already realized this, but I only put one paycheck for all of her salary. So it's actually $46.92, and we'll pull that over. So, okay, we have $37,000 to work with. So let's move on to the actual budget. So here we have 6 different categories. This is expense, debt, sinking fund, long-term savings, investment, and checking fund. So we're going to start with expenses. I like to think of these as monthly expenses, things you're spending money on every single month. One strategy you can use is just thinking through all the different categories, writing those out first, and then moving on to the actual numbers. So that's what we'll do here. So we know we have rent, we know we have utilities, groceries, and miscellaneous spending. We'll just call it fund money. So these are all expenses. These are just monthly obligations that don't include debt because we will get to that in the debt section. So her rent was $1,500, utilities $200, groceries we'll say $500, restaurant / going out, she likes to do this, so we'll give her $300, coffee $50, gym is $140, pet $75, her phone bill is $100, gas is $100, and fund money we'll say $300. To make this accurate, we need to get rid of these. So that gives us a total plan of $3,265, and we'll just take that and extend it through the end of the year. So now we know we have $11,000 left to work with, and we'll move on to our next category. So next is debt. So we know she has a car payment, and we know she has some credit card debt. So her car is $406, and her credit card, she pays $100 a month, and we will extend that through to see what we have. So we have $921 left every single month and about $7,300 left for the year. So when I set up my budget for the year, I like to use these as checkpoints just to see where I'm at. One thing I have gotten questions on is if I have a credit card payment, do I put that in my transactions? So if you're in a situation where you use your credit card for everything and you pay it in full every single month, you're not going to put the actual payment into your transactions. You would only put it in the budget if you actually have credit card debt, because you're already tracking everything you're spending on that credit card and off the credit card. So if you also track the credit card payment, that would be like double dipping there as well. Okay, so the next category is sinking funds. So I like to think of sinking funds as anything I'm spending sporadically throughout the entire year. So an example of this would be her car insurance. So she pays this every 6 months, and instead of forgetting about it and then getting the big bill every 6 months, so she's paying $1,200 every 6 months, which puts us at $200 a month. So we're gonna add 200 here. She also has to worry about her car maintenance. So this is like oil changes, any miscellaneous car maintenance. So we're gonna do $50 a month. Then for holidays and weddings, we're gonna do $50 a month and just include that under gifts. Then she has cats, so she has to have a vet visit / pet insurance. And that is also $50 a month. And she likes to go on vacation every year, so we're gonna add travel for $200. Okay, so now we have all of her spending for the entire year here in the spreadsheet. So we have $371 left over every single month to go towards saving and investing. So that puts us at a little under $3,000. So next we're gonna go to long-term savings. She doesn't have an emergency fund, so she's gonna set that up, and we're gonna do $300 a month. And she also wants to keep investing into her Roth IRA, and we're just gonna do $50. All right, and then the last thing is a checking fund. All this means is you're intentionally not spending a portion of your money, and it's just gonna stay inside of your checking account as a buffer against any overspending and to make sure we're not overdrafting in your account. So we're just gonna call this checking fund, and we're gonna just use that extra leftover $21 to bring us to zero for the year. So here we have her entire budget set up, and the only thing missing is this column here is starting money. So this starting money column is just saying how much are you starting out with. So for rent, utilities, all these expenses, realistically it's gonna be zero. For sinking funds, you might have already set aside sinking funds, so these might have some inside of it. Like for travel, we'll say she has $500 already sitting there. Her emergency fund, she has zero. Roth IRA, I don't add my actual starting investment amounts into my budget because it just fluctuates so much. I use the net worth section to actually track how much my investments are. So we're just gonna put zero on the Roth IRA. And then checking fund, because money is coming and going from the checking account, she has no idea how much is actually a buffer versus what is allocated towards future expenses. So we're just gonna say zero and build that up from scratch. All right, now that is everything. So there's a couple things you can do once you have this set. So you can go up here and look at the breakdown of your take-home money. So we can see 70% is going towards expenses and 11%, almost 12, is going towards sinking funds. So these are spending throughout the year. So technically she has more like 82% of her money is going towards just spending. This to me would be a pretty big red flag, and I personally would go down and see where I can switch around my money, where I can reduce my spending and my expenses in order to increase my savings and investments. So also what I would recommend is going through and looking at your total for the year and seeing if that number aligns with what you want to be spending. Do you get that much value out of what you're spending on? So for example, for emergency fund, we know we're adding $2,400 to the emergency fund this year, and we're gonna end at $2,700. But when we look at restaurants / going out, that's also $2,400. To me, I would say, okay, maybe I could reduce this to $250 or $200 and see how that affects the rest of my budget. Because Sally is still prioritizing going out, but maybe she can go out 1 or 2 times less per month in order to put more money towards her emergency fund. So we're gonna put $400, and now we're gonna end with $3,600 at the end of the year. So if she's happy with that, she can be happy with that. We would look here, and 8.5% of her take home is going towards her long-term savings. So I would definitely spend the bulk of my time looking through the numbers, seeing what is realistic. I think building out a realistic budget is more important than building out an idealistic budget. It's not sustainable to just completely cut out all of your expenses, but also be honest with yourself. And if you do know you overspend in certain areas, maybe try to cut back a little bit. This is a little bit more eye-opening because you can see your money and what it's doing over a longer period of time. Okay, so now that we have done her take-home pay, we're gonna go down to paycheck deductions. Just so it's not confusing, I'll unhide these. So these are paycheck deductions. I just use a paycheck calculator to estimate all of this, but you can look at your pay stubs and have actual accurate information if you're curious how much you're actually paying every year for insurance and for taxes and stuff like that. So Sally has a 4% match and she's contributing 4%. I recommend splitting out your 401k and your 401k match, especially if you're trying to max your 401k, because you can just much more easily see all of your contributions. All of these investments will also roll up into your monthly dashboards. All right, so that is the entire budget. The hardest thing is actually thinking through what categories, where your spending is actually going. So what I would do as I walk through this spreadsheet is just hide all of these sheets and rename 2024 planning. All right, so now we're moving on to transactions. So a couple things to know is you're gonna track every single purchase you make throughout the month, as well as your income. You have to track your income in order for it to populate on the monthly dashboards, but you do not track when you save in your sinking funds and when you save in your long-term savings. So those numbers will populate based off of this planning tab. So if you go into May and you say you're going to put $400 into your emergency fund and it gets to June and you didn't do that, you need to go back into your budget and reconcile this. So if you only put $200 into your emergency fund, you have to go back here and update this to $200 and then put that extra $200 in other places based on your spending. So it is really important to keep your budget up to date and actually monitor where your money is going. If you spend in your sinking funds or your long-term savings, you do track that as a transaction and it'll reduce the amount that's in that bucket. And you do track when you invest. So I like to think of investing as spending because you're buying something. You're buying an asset, but you are still spending money. We're going to go in here and do a sample for an entire month's spending. So we're going to start with rent, and it'll populate the same color as the expenses in planning. So we have that purple. This is just color coding, so it makes it a little bit easier if you're looking through all your transactions. Utilities will say 180, and I'll just fill out the rest of this. Okay, so now we have a full month of her spending, and we'll use this when we go through our annual dashboard and our monthly dashboard. But one thing I do want to just highlight is we do need to be adding salary. So any income that you receive when you do receive it, add it as a transaction. So we know her salary is $46.92. Okay, so we're gonna hide the instruction sheet for transactions because we get it, and on to the debt payoff tracker. So I already added her Toyota Camry. This is $25,000 with a minimum payment of $406 and interest rate of $599. And since this is our starting amount and this is starting in May, I'm just gonna erase these because that's not accurate, and I'm gonna say May is equal to our loan amount, just so I have a more accurate estimate if you don't wanna go back and see your statements for January. Okay, so let's add her credit card. So under debt 2, I'm gonna add credit card. She has $1,000. Her minimum payment is $100 and her interest rate is 22%. So same thing, I'm gonna take this because this is our starting amount in May. We're just gonna say this is equal to our starting amount in May. All right, so now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and hide all these extra ones because we do not need them, and we're gonna clean this up a little bit. Okay, so we can see we have total debt of $26,000. We have minimum payments of $506 and a weighted interest rate of 6.61%. So these are just estimated debt payoff. So this is based off of interest compounding monthly, not daily. So it may not be exactly accurate to the cent. So my monthly routine is updating my numbers on the first of every single month. And this just lets me actually go into my accounts, see the number, make sure all of my statements are accurate. And it kind of just gives me some discipline to actually look in and be aware of my debt every single month. So we can see in the total amounts how much money we're actually paying off every single month. This will show us total payoff for the year. So we're going to pay off about $3,000 of debt for the year at the current rates. Since this is an annual plan, this is really just focused on your debt for the year. If you want to have a little bit more of a future look and you want to see when you actually pay it off, you just unhide those rows to the left and we have a couple extra years. So what you can do is go down and actually just copy and paste the year here, and it'll automatically populate those numbers, and you can just keep going until you reach 0. You would just have to go back and edit, like this is 2028, oops, this is 2028, this is 2029. You would just update these, but you can see like, okay, this is 2030. I'm going to be debt free around July of 2030. So that is just honestly if you're curious and you want to track it that way. But all you really have to do is just update your numbers once a month to make sure you have the most accurate debt numbers and you can properly track your payoff. So now we're going to hide this sheet because we know how to do debt payoff and move on to the net worth tracker. Okay, so for the net worth tracker, we already have some of her items. So her car, her emergency fund, her 401k, and her Roth IRA. And we don't have any other assets. So we're gonna go ahead and hide the rest of these. And this will automatically pull in all of your debt. So these liabilities is all of your debt, and you can see kind of your liabilities versus your assets and what that brings your net worth to. So for car, I don't know how much cars are. I'm just gonna say it's the same value. Her emergency fund as of May is 0. Her 401k, let's just say she has $5,000. And her Roth IRA, she has $2,000. So that would put her total debt at $26,000 and her total assets at $33,000. So now we have our net worth of $7,000, but our net change is negative $32,000. So this is not accurate, and I want to explain why. So we're calculating based off of what your net change is for all of May. This is assuming you're updating your net worth numbers on the 1st of every single month. So on the 1st of May, you have your numbers, and then on the 1st of June, you're going to update your numbers. So the difference between those two numbers is the growth you had in the entire month of May. So your May net change will not be accurate until you update your June numbers. So you're going to want to go in monthly. If you care, this is totally optional. If you want to know your net change every single month, you'll have to update your numbers every single month. So that one's easy enough. So we're going to hide this sheet, and then we're going to move on to our annual dashboard. So this one is going to populate throughout the entire year. And a couple things to note is the total saved is based off of your total planned for the year. So this number here is how much you saved at the end of the year. And then total invested, this includes paycheck deductions, and this percent also includes the paycheck deductions. So that's why it's important to have those numbers accurate. Add your tax, add your insurance, anything that's coming out, so you can accurately know what percent of your income you actually invested. So here in the year in review, you're going to get your total planned for each of these categories, your total spent, and the total money you have remaining for the rest of the year. And then same for all of your subcategories. So another thing to note is this average is for the entire year. So this again will be accurate at the end of the year. But I do have a tip if you are more interested in going through all of your spending in every single category. There is a spending section. So this is totally optional to look at, but it does populate the exact numbers for every single category for every single month. This is populating everything from that transactions tab. So it's all of your actual income and all of your actual spending. So if you want a more accurate average, you would go in here, and this is doing the average for the entire year, but we're starting in May. So we would go in here and say, we're not starting in January, we're actually starting in G, which is May. So you would take that and you would plop this down through all of your categories. So you can mess around with this. I hid it just so people don't mess up the formulas, because if you go in here and manually update it, you're gonna lose all of the formulas and the transactions tab will not work. So that is why it's not just open. I do wanna give a warning to people. Do not actually update here unless you don't plan to use the transactions tab. So if you know, for example, okay, my car is 406, I'm not gonna make any extra payments, I don't want to track this every single month, you can go in here and just manually enter 406 for everything. I just don't do it that way because I like to keep all of my transactions top of mind and actually manually enter them. but that is an option if you want it. So just to be safe, we're gonna re-hide this sheet, go back to our annual dashboard, and let's just walk through the rest of these. So spending versus income, obviously, this is where you can see how much you fluctuate throughout the year with your spending, with your income. Also, this will track net worth. This will be accurate as you update your net worth throughout the year. Savings by month, this is everything that's going into your sinking funds and your long-term savings. And then investments by month is taking into account any post-paycheck and pre-paycheck investments. And then obviously total debt will give you an estimate of what your debt is going to look like throughout the year. And it looks like I accidentally added this to the wrong spot. All right, so that's everything. Now we're on to our last set, which is the monthly dashboard. So like I said, this is probably where you're going to spend the most time between your planning, your transactions tab, and the monthly dashboard. This is where you're going to see the actual breakdown of your monthly spending, saving, investing, debt payoff, everything. So let's go through what you're going to see. So starting off, month in review, you will see your planned, spent, and remaining money for the month. Your planned income is the income that you planned in the planning tab, and your actual income is the actual income that hits your bank account that you track in the transactions tab. The total expenses, invested, saved, debt payoff, these are your total numbers for the month. And it gives you the percent of monthly income, but a note on invested is that this does include paycheck deduction. So this isn't just based off of your take-home pay. Then we have checking buffer. This is taking any money that's in your checking fund, adding any money you have remaining in your expenses and your debt. So let's say Sally planned to have an extra $500 debt payment towards her car, but she didn't actually do it. It would show up in here as a buffer in her checking account. She didn't do anything with that money. She didn't spend it on the debt like she said she would. So it's just extra fluff in her account, and it's going to be remaining in the debt section. Net worth update. This will be accurate once you complete your next month's net worth update and debt update. This also will be most accurate once you complete your next month's debt update. Then coming down here, you'll get a breakdown of your planned, spent, and remaining for all of your individual categories. So spent, this will be green if you spent less than or equal to your planned amount, and it'll be red if you spent more than your planned amount. So where my take home went this month, this is giving you a breakdown of your spending and saving for the month. So this is taking the actual spending for your expenses, your debt, what you actually invested and tracked in the transactions tab, and then what you plan to save in your long-term savings and your sinking funds. So that's how it's pulling those numbers. And then did I stick to the plan? This is just showing you a breakdown of your categories. So what you plan to spend in expenses, what you actually spent in expenses, same for the rest of these. So I did want to point out that at the bottom of these sheets, there is a shortcut to get to the next month. So this is also an opportunity to clean up the spreadsheet. You could hide all of the future and past months. That is there to make it easier so you don't have to find it in view hidden and scroll through all of these. You can actually just use the dashboard itself. We'll go down here, April, June. Like you can take it a month back, you can take it a month forward, and it's just a little bit easier. Has a shortcut. And then lastly, a transactions log. So everything that you log in the transactions tab will just populate in each monthly dashboard to make it easier to see like, okay, this is everything for the month of May. This just makes it a little bit easier because everything is in one spot, but do not make changes here. This isn't where you're actually going to be putting your transactions. This is just populating from the transactions tab. So let's actually look at our May dashboard. Since we tracked Sally's actual spending for the month of May, let's go through her dashboard and see how she did. So starting with month in review, we see a lot of green. So it looks like she actually underspent in each category or spent exactly what she was supposed to. Overall, this looks like a really positive month, but we'll go down and look at the categories to see where we might have under or overspent. So utilities was a little low, but she averages about $200, so we're not going to make any adjustments here. So we're going to actually keep that $20 there to roll over for the next month because we may have a future month that's a little bit more expensive and that can cover the difference. It looks like we did pretty good in our groceries budget, but we went over by quite a lot in our restaurants and going out budget. So this is where I would go in and just think about what I actually spent on. Do I feel good about that number? So if I spent $330, but I had a really great time and I valued it, maybe I would adjust my budget in my planning and increase my amount every single month. Realistically, Sally can't really afford that. So What I personally do in this situation is leave it as is, because if we go to remaining and expenses, we're good. We had a little bit of buffer overall, so we don't have to worry about overdrafting in our checking account, paying our credit card bills. So I would leave that as negative 130 and then take that into the next month. So if we go here to June, we have restaurant going out budget. It's still $200 planned, but we only have $70 because of that previous month's overspending. So Sally went all out in May, and now she has to kind of dial it back for a month in order to get back into an average of $200 a month. So that is the strategy that I use. I don't care necessarily going into the negatives. I leave it negative as long as my overall checking buffer is positive. And then I just use that as a motivation to spend less or do an intentional low buy the next month to make up for that overspending. So we're gonna keep this here. We also overspent in coffee, we can see. So again, I would probably leave it as is, leave it negative, and then go into next month being very intentional about restaurant going out and coffee spending. So if I was Sally, I would definitely use that as a learning opportunity. I would be more aware of my spending in those areas and do an intentional low buy month. Otherwise, things look pretty good. But another thing I can note is Roth IRA. It looks like we didn't invest anything. We still have $50 remaining in investments. Sally knows that she invested, so that's a signal to go back here and say, May, Roth IRA, I invested $50. Back and see we have a total invested of $550. That includes pre-paycheck, post-paycheck. So that brings us to 8.59% of total invested. So we can see we spent 66% on expenses, 20% on savings, but that does include sinking funds, 10% on debt payoff. So some other things to know is actual income. This will be green if it matches your planned income. If this does not match, it will be red, and that's a signal to either track the remaining money that you didn't track, or if you actually made a different amount, you need to go back into your planning tab and adjust your income. The planned income has to be equal to your actual income in order for this to work, because we're budgeting based off of that planned income. And if your actual income is different, we're not budgeting with the same numbers. So we want to make sure that we're accurate and keeping these exactly the same. So we can see the full breakdown of the take-home money here. So this is just taking what we actually spent versus what we actually saved and invested. So this 67% doesn't match this 66% because this is taking into account all of the income that we took home, and this is taking into account the breakdown based off of this spending. We do have $40 that's rolling over, so that's why this isn't exactly the same. And then did I stick to the plan? Looks like we underspent a little bit in expenses, which is good. Debt was the same, so that's good. Sinking funds, we saved a lot more than we spent, which is neutral, doesn't really mean too much as long as we're intentionally spending. Long-term savings is good. Investments is the same, so we're good there. And then checking fund, we were able to build in a little bit of a buffer. So we can go down here, look through our transactions, kind of review the month and close it out. Another thing to note is net worth update. We discussed this already. We would need to update June's numbers in order to get an accurate estimate. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're just gonna say the car still is the same amount, but we can go in and see that we saved $400 in our emergency fund. So now we have a $400 emergency fund. Our 401k, we will say $550, and Roth IRA, we're just gonna add the $50. So now going back into our May dashboard, we increased our net worth by $1,300, which I think is pretty darn good. There is definitely a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get your full planning set up, this should take the longest amount of time. Once this is done, you're basically 90% completed with your budget for the entire year. So the only thing you really have to worry about is manually updating all of your transactions in the transactions tab. I would highly recommend having a monthly routine, a weekly routine. I personally will sit down multiple times a week and just updating because I hate looking through a bunch of numbers and being like, did I spend this? Did I sell this to someone, what did this money go towards? So I just prefer to take like 30 seconds every other day to sit down and log my transactions, because I think overall I spend less time updating that way. Rather than once a month sitting down for like 20 minutes and adding everything all at once is a little bit intimidating. So I definitely don't do that and wouldn't recommend it, but it is an option. Other than that, it's just updating your debt monthly and updating your net worth monthly. So for me, I personally spend probably no more than 20 to 30 minutes inside of my spreadsheet every single month. Now that is just personally, obviously I make videos, so I'm in it a lot more than that for like making content wise, but on the personal side, 20 to 30 minutes max looking through this. If I'm bored, sometimes I'll go in here and just like put random numbers in the planning and being like, what if I moved to this apartment? What if I moved to this apartment? What would it do to my budget? So I mess around with the numbers a lot just because I think it's fun. This template definitely has a little bit more upfront work, but once you complete your budget once, it's essentially set for the rest of the year. So all of the work remaining is just maintenance. Updating your transactions and updating your debt and net worth once a month is all you'd have to do after your initial setup. And as you move through the year, you're gonna notice different patterns and maybe make adjustments every single month. Maybe a subscription you forgot about. Maybe you don't spend as much money in a certain area as you thought you would. And so you can reallocate that towards other areas. This just lets you have kind of a bird's eye view of your finances for the entire year. And then you can use that as a starting place to get more and more accurate as you move through each month. The last thing I want to point out is this is an annual budget, so you can use this year after year after year. So all you'd have to do is go back and make a new copy of your spreadsheet. And once you make that new spreadsheet, your December numbers, your ending remaining balances for all of these, all you'd have to do is copy that and paste values only in next year's budget. So you don't have to make sure everything is zero at the end of the year. That now becomes the starting amount that you have to work with next year. So it's a really seamless transition from one year to the next. I have talked entirely too much already, but I do just want to point out that a lot of this is my philosophy, my way of budgeting, and that doesn't necessarily make it the right way or the only way. So if you have a different system that you use with this template, that doesn't mean it's wrong. You don't have to keep numbers negative. You can adjust your budget every single month to zero out that remaining balance. Like, you don't have to keep money carried over month to month to month. That is the way I like to do it. I like to think of my money in averages throughout the year rather than just ending numbers every month. That is a personal preference. This is just one way of thinking about your budget. Thank you so much if you have purchased my budget template, and if you haven't, I do have a link in the description box, but I genuinely hope this has at least been a little bit helpful, and thank you so much if you've made it to the end of this video.